Hello Battle Cats players, my name is Chance and welcome to my guide. I suspect you might have heard the expression in the past that not all heroes wear capes. That sentiment applies to the cat we're talking about today, as instead of wearing a cape, it instead decides to hide in a TV or put on an octopus costume, or pretend to be a table. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, today we're talking about Kotatsu Cat. This super rare cat can be found in rare cat capsules. And let me tell you, you're probably going to want to have him. It is my hope that through the course of this video and discussing Kotatsu Cat's evolutions, performance, use cases, and strategies, as well as taking a look at his stats and talents, you can make a more informed decision as to the best time and place to use Kotatsu Cat, as well as how far to invest into him to get maximum bang for your buck. Let's first get started by taking a look at his evolutions, starting out with Kotatsu Cat himself, whose description reads, very effective in winter, not that it matters, damage from floating enemies greatly reduced, might weaken floating enemies. Then at level 10 it will evolve into Sadako Cat, whose description reads, hid in a TV to scare people for fun, was never able to get out, haunts TVs now, resistant to, plus might weaken floating enemies. And then at level 30, as well as the addition of some Catfruit as well as XP, it becomes Octopus Cat, whose description reads, extra flexible cat who feels most comfortable in small, dark spaces. Cancels wave attacks, tough versus floating, might weaken floating enemies. This is very much the common setup for most of the super rares. Now then, let's take a look at Kotatsu Cat's overall performance. As far as class is concerned, Kotatsu Cat is largely considered to be a tanker. A tanker being a unit that has extremely high HP and durability, and are essentially aimed at just being a more durable meat shield. Whilst often not as spammable, they are far more chonky, for lack of a better term. Under pros, you have high health, 1 knockback, and decent recharge time. And as far as cons are concerned, you have single target, low attack power for normal and evolved form at least, short range, and mediocre speed. As far as other considerations are, you have resistant to floating enemies, and 30% chance to weaken floating enemies to 50%, and wave shield in true form. I do just want to point out while I have the screen active that decent recharge time is kind of a misnomer. Its recharge time is fine. It's enough to be able to always have at least one of them out essentially, but it's not quite quick enough to spam them. So it is a little bit awkward to some capacity, but it's still not bad, and for a tanker unit it's pretty decent. Now let's check out some gameplay and talk about strategy and use case. First and foremost, as far as cost is concerned, in Chapter 1 this unit will cost 480 cents, Chapter 2 720, and Chapter 3 960 cents. As far as how to best use Kotatsu Cat, really at the end of the day, if you see floating enemies, consider putting him on your squad. He has massive damage reduction towards them and has a chance to weaken them. This combined with his already incredibly chonky base HP, make him quite the valuable unit. In many ways, Kotatsu Cat as well as Row Cat are kind of two heads of the same coin, at least as so far as tanking is concerned. His true form is a little bit more interesting, and in many ways I would consider this unit almost mandatory to have. While I suppose in theory there's an argument to be made that you can circumvent virtually every stage without him, his usefulness cannot be understated when going up against wave-creating enemies or wave-generating enemies, as he is one of the best wave blockers in the entire game. That, combined with his ability to be able to get into enemies' blind spots and hit them, make him quite the useful unit, and he is certainly worthy of hypermaxing or boosting using Cat's Eyes. While I wouldn't consider him my first choice for doing so, I would consider him perfectly viable as a candidate. However, it is worth noting that because of his decreased attack rate, in the case of waves without any wave creating or generating enemies, you're probably better off going with his evolved form Sadako Cat, as it still maintains the other benefits as far as floating enemies are concerned without that drop in attack rate, making him a far more effective slower. However, even with that being said, there is still an argument that Sanzo Cat is still superior in the slowing department, but still, Kotatsu Cat is a nice alternative to have for stages where you can't quite fit Sanzo Cat. Now let's take a look at its cat combos. First up, we have horror movies, which is a resistant effect up of the medium variety. It requires Zombie Cat, Vengeful Cat, and Sadako Cat, and increases the efficacy of resistant by 20%. Resistant, if you're not familiar, is alternatively known as tough, and allows cats to only take 1/4 the damage against various traits, or the specified trait rather, and with the implementation of the fruit treasures, this gets knocked down to 1/5 the damage taken. So to add another 20% onto this is quite good, at least on stages where it's pertinent, in this case being ideally floating stages, just adding a good amount of survivability to an already quite survivable unit. Next up, we have Lazing About. This is a strong effect up of the small variety. It involves Kotatsu Cat and Adult Cat and increases the efficacy of the strong ability by 10%. And in case you are not familiar, strong units only take half of the damage from the specified trait or traits and deal 1.5 damage in return. With the implementation of fruit treasures, this gets boosted to 0.4% damage reduction and a 1.8% damage multiplication. This is very much a middle-of-the-road cat combo. It's not particularly great, not particularly bad, makes sense on some stages, but definitely nothing to build towards. If it was a medium, maybe we could talk about it, but it's not, so. And that really is about it for Kotatsu Cat's currently existing cat combos. Now let's take a look at the Catfruit requirements to true form Kotatsu Cat. You're looking at 4 green Catfruit obtained from the growing green level every Monday, 1 purple Catfruit obtained from the growing purple stage every Tuesday, 2 red Catfruit obtained from the growing red level every Wednesday, 1 blue Catfruit obtained from the growing blue level every Thursday, and 1 epic Catfruit, which can technically be obtained from any of the growing stages with the exception of growing strange and growing evil. Also, the dual cyclone fight can also drop, and after completing an ancient curse, they can be obtained from the growing epic stage that will be available for a few hours every weekend. And to top it all off, you're looking at 500,000 XP. This, once again, is fairly typical for most of the super rare cats. Now then, I'm just going to flash a couple of the charts pertaining to Kotatsu Cat and his evolution's stats while reading out some trivia pertaining to him. Sadako Cat is a reference to Sadako Yamamura, aka Ringu, the TV haunting ghost from the horror movie series The Ring. In version 3, or version 3.0 of Nakuro Desaru, Kotatsu received the ability to weaken floating enemies to 50%. Even though the Catfruit evolution description says it has increased attack speed, the attack speed actually decreases. Even though the true form's description says it has weakens enemy, it still only weakens floating enemies, even though it was specified in the other forms, which may also be attributed to floating enemies being mentioned earlier in the sentence. And that really is all there is to say about current trivia. If there's anything you would like to note about Kotatsu Cat, feel free to put it down beneath in the comments section. Now let's talk about talents. As far as available talents are to be concerned, Kotatsu Cat has access to Weaken, which will increase the weaken duration by about 0.17 seconds per level, up to a maximum of 1.67 seconds, for a total NP cost of 125. Resist Freeze, which reduces the freeze duration by 16% and increases by 6% per level up to a maximum of 70%, for a total NP cost of 125. Resist Slow, which reduces slow duration by 16% and improves by 6% per level up to 70% total, for a total NP cost of 125 as well. Curse Immunity for a cost of 75 NP, and a defense buff which increases health by 2% per level up to 20% for a total NP cost of 125. Now, Kotatsu Cat, or in this particular case Octopus Cat, is in a really weird spot as far as talents are concerned. And the reason for that is his actual use doesn't really require very many of these. In fact, the only thing that Octopus Cat will really benefit from as far as his talents are concerned is the defense buff, first and foremost, as it just makes him a better tanker. and curse immunity, as it allows him to go up against relic enemies with fairly little downside. Outside of that, everything on this list is kind of worthless. Increasing his weaken duration slightly doesn't really help, considering throughout the course of any long or drawn out stage you're going to stack up quite a few of them, so weaken should in theory always be applied. Resist freeze and resist slow are kind of moot. There are only really a few enemies that Kotatsu Cat will need to worry about this with, and for those enemies in particular there are better solutions. Not to mention the fact that they are quite expensive for fairly little payoff. Ultimately, if you don't have a unit that can inherently resist or be straight up immune to these effects, then perhaps it might be worth investing into them, but ultimately they're just better options. So take on the defensive buff first, and then perhaps followed up by curse immunity once you start dealing with a lot of the relic enemies. Now that you know what I think about Kotatsu Cat, let's take a look at what my community thinks. And bear in mind that if you would like to share your thoughts on any of the cats that we're going to be covering in our videos, as well as any of the enemies or the cat combinations, be sure to check out our community tab and comment on the relevant posts. First and foremost, we have one of the more refined members of our community, for lack of a better term, that is Cat Game Player, who says he is pretty good in the early game with his weaken versus floating, as that is one of the most common boss traits. His viability gets worse mid-game, but his true form makes him much better. His talents aren't the best, but the wave block and defense increase are incredibly helpful versus floating and wave enemies. He does die quickly due to his low range and bad base ASP, second worst wave blocker to be honest. Out of all 6 we have, so still pretty solid. There is one thing I do kinda disagree on with this, that being that his low range is inherently a downside. I would make an argument that for most tankers and meat shields, low range is actually helpful as it allows them to get out ahead of other enemies, and especially for a wave blocker, just prevent as many cats as possible from getting hit. In addition to that, it's this low attack range that also allows him to get potentially past certain enemies' danger zone essentially and into their blind spot. But outside of that, as always, incredible review. Thank you so much. And if you see him commenting down beneath, be sure to check out his channel as well. And as always, you have I'm Freaking Stupid, who also has a channel as well, and he says, not the best at the first 2 forms, but amazing at true form, 9 out of 10. And while I can see why he feels this way, I think his first 2 forms still have a place in the meta, as Cat Game Player points out, it is a very common thing for boss enemies to have the floating trait associated with them, making Kotatsu Cat pretty valuable on those particular stages. But I kinda see where he's coming from as far as meta relevancy is concerned. And if you have commented on the relevant community post and I haven't voiced it, I do apologize. All that means is you commented after I did the voice work for this particular episode. And I will edit as many as I can in post before I actually post up the video. Thank you so much for everyone who weighed in, I certainly do appreciate it. And that really is about all I have to say about Kotatsu Cat and his various forms. If there's anything I've missed or neglected to mention or just misrepresented, feel free to let me know down beneath in the comments section. And while you're down there, share your thoughts about Kotatsu Cat and his various formations as well. And as always, if there's anything I can do to improve the quality and presentation of these videos, be sure to let me know down beneath as well. I certainly do appreciate it. Thank you so much to everyone who's liked, subscribed, and helped to build this channel so far. I certainly am very appreciative and very humbled by your efforts. If you haven't subscribed yet, I highly urge you to do so. We have quite the cool community, and we have a lot of community posts that would really appreciate having you weigh in on. Some of these posts are gathering your thoughts and opinions on various units in the game, as well as some interesting quizzes to test your knowledge. Not to mention, I have it on good authority that if you like and subscribe, you are guaranteed to get an Uber on your next gacha roll. And who doesn't want that? Now then, as always guys, thank you so much for watching until this point. I certainly appreciate it. And as always, I'll be talking to you soon.